Hey everyone, welcome back. We are going to talk about chapter 4 today for our Marketing 450 Marketing Management class. This chapter is on opportunity analysis, market segmentation, and sales forecasting to some extent. So we are going to dive right in. I am excited about this chapter. I had a professor once when I was an undergrad, and he said the most important concept in all of marketing, the thing that what marketing has brought to the world that has been more important than anything else, is the concept of market segmentation. And I just have always remembered that, and I just think that that's such an interesting story about how marketing has brought to the world something about how we can understand people better and understand our customers better. So let's get into the chapter and we'll talk more about it. So the first section of this chapter is on opportunity analysis. And so this is looking at, when we look out into the world, we'll talk about a variety of different strategies that we might use, things like, diversification or product development or market development or market penetration. Those are our four main growth strategies. But when we look at those opportunities out there, how do we figure out which of those things to actually pursue? Right. So one of those is to try to help us to try to understand where we already fit in the market using that particular matrix, the growth strategies matrix that I just mentioned. Another piece is to understand ourselves and our environment a little bit better by going through a SWOT analysis that we talked about in a previous chapter. And one of the things about a SWOT analysis that I just want to reiterate quickly is that when we think about a SWOT analysis, it's not just listing, some strengths. Let me list 3 to 5 strengths. Let me list 3 to 5 weaknesses, so on and so forth. And it's just a list, and then we move on with our lives, and that's it. And sometimes that is all we kind of do for the purposes of our classes. And I think we're kind of missing something there in terms of what does that actually do for a company. We call it a SWOT analysis. And where's the analysis piece there, right? And of course, the analysis piece is in looking at where do our opportunities match up with our strengths, right? What opportunities are out there that make sense for us as an organization because we have some strengths that match up with those particular opportunities we've identified. Perhaps we see threats on the horizon in the environment, and we see that we have strengths already in place that will help us kind of protect ourselves from those threats. But maybe we see that, that we don't have any strengths, and that actually matches up with those threats, match up with weaknesses. And that's an area we need to work on. Maybe it is that there's a really cool opportunity out there, but that particular opportunity doesn't match up with any of our strengths. And so maybe it's just not a good fit for our organization. So that is to some extent gets us into this section of opportunity analysis and looking at how do we identify opportunities? Do they fit with our firm and our strengths? And then how can we evaluate that opportunity to decide if it's something that we should pursue? So we are going to go a little bit more in depth on this and talk through each of these different processes. So the first one is opportunity identification. The 3 main types of opportunity identification are finding new types of buyers, finding unsatisfied needs of buyers, or creating new ways or means for satisfying those buyer needs. So our opportunity analysis really focuses on finding markets that we can serve. But the kicker here is that we can profitably serve. So we talk about marketing, meaning that we are going to satisfy customer needs in a profitable way. So that also plays a role here when we think about opportunity identification. So let's think about these 3 types of opportunity identification. New types of buyers is our first one. So can you think of any examples of new types of buyers that a company may have that you can think of that are out there in the world that, are for some reason new types of buyers to an organization, or something that you've seen in the past where you feel like, look, there's an example of a company that has been able to take advantage of these new types of buyers. And I'll let you think about it just for a second, and then I'll give you an example. Okay, so let's think about new types of buyers. So my research, I do a lot of research in the area of family. And so one of the things that I see in terms of new types of buyers in those areas, I'll give you two examples, both in the family area. The first is same-sex couples. For a long time, it was sort of taboo for companies to be directly targeting same-sex couples or same-sex parented families. But what we now see in society is that this is a growing market for companies, and it is no longer taboo for companies to overtly target, have same-sex couples as their target market. And so we do see a lot more companies taking advantage of this, seeing this as a new type of buyer. Not that it's really a new type of person, but that it's a new type of segment that we as a company could pursue. We see this a lot in terms of, things like insurance products. Family photography is a big area for this one. There's a whole underlying motivation for why family photography is particularly important, and a variety of other products and services that we see companies taking advantage of adding same-sex couples as an additional target market for their company, for their product. A second example within the family area would be multiracial families, specifically multiracial children. This is a growing area in particular for hair care products, where a lot of families are seeing that traditional hair care products that are traditionally targeted to Caucasian people, and traditional hair care products that are traditionally targeted to African American people, for example, don't really work for mixed children's hair. And so biracial children or multiracial children is the fastest growing child demographic in the country. And so this is a growing area. And so there's a lot of different companies that have either added new products on to address this need within families. And there are also a variety of companies that have that's their entire company, is creating hair care products for multiracial children, and then of course adults. But it's really has started as this targeting of the multiracial families to start with younger children, and then as they grow up, they continue to be, I think the idea would be that they continue to be loyal then to those brands that have worked for them in the past. So there's two examples of new types of buyers. Let's talk about unsatisfied needs. I'll give you just a minute here to think about, can you think of any examples of companies that have taken advantage of unsatisfied needs? All right, did you come up with anything? Think those through, kind of make a note to yourself of the different ideas you've come up with. So unsatisfied needs, this one there's a wide variety of things we could talk about here. I think a lot of times it also overlaps with the new ways to satisfy needs. So, we like to categorize things, but lots of times our categories are very blurry, and that's just sort of the way it is. But as humans, one of the first things we learn is categorization. So it makes sense that we continue to try to categorize things that way. Anyways, unsatisfied needs. So this might be a local kind of community thing. Maybe there's a need in the community for a different type of restaurant that doesn't exist yet. Maybe there is a need in the community for a different product or service that isn't in that local community yet. So that would be one like local example. I remember when I was a kid, I was growing up in a kind of a small town. And when we got an Applebee's, that was something we had no idea that we needed, but we thought we were so big time when we got the Applebee's. Like, we were big city people when we got the Applebee's. Okay. So that could be an unsatisfied need, really a need that people didn't even know that they had. I would say probably minivans, when minivans first came out, were definitely an example of meeting an unsatisfied need. People didn't know that they could, had the people with families really had, options of sedans or full-size vans. And there are a lot of families that kind of need something in between. And so that is probably a good example of unsatisfied needs. And then new ways to satisfy needs. I think you can probably come up with some examples of this one, but I'm going to pause for a second and let you think about that. So with this one, we often think of things like technology. Maybe a new way to satisfy needs kind of combined with unsatisfied needs would be things like the ability to communicate with people when you're on the go, right? And that started the entire cell phone industry of car phones, right? Think back to the late 80s and 90s when people carried around like phones in a bag and they cost like thousands and thousands of dollars to get your phone in a bag that was really, when we look back, seems like a really not very effective product compared to what we have now. But that started the whole industry, and now we have these incredible phones that we can not just talk to people on the go when we're in our cars or whatever, but do really keep up with our entire lives, whether it be good or bad. Another example of maybe a new way to satisfy needs would be, I think like Walmart grocery pickup, maybe a good example of this, or even Amazon. Amazon started, we're going to talk about Amazon a lot in this chapter. Amazon started as just an online bookseller. That's all they did. They just sold books. And I think Amazon has grown to become something that no one could have imagined at the time, with really revolutionizing and becoming an everyday part of people's lives. And that ability to go online and satisfy the need of being able to purchase your books online really was a new thing, a new way to satisfy needs. When they came out with Amazon Prime and the free 2-day shipping with your membership, that was a new thing. Nobody had really ever done that before, or at least not in a way that really was helpful and made sense. Netflix, when Netflix first started, right? Being able to pick out your DVDs that were sent to your house and then send them back in. That was a brand new way to satisfy the need for entertainment. Actually, Blockbuster tried to mimic Netflix, and I think Blockbuster had a far superior service, because they had a service where, so with Netflix, you had a list and you had to pay a certain amount to get a certain number of DVDs that you could keep. And so whatever was on the next thing on your list, that's the DVD that you got. And then you would send it back into Netflix. So when it arrived at the warehouse, then they would send you the next thing on your list. So it was pretty cool. It really worked pretty great. But when Blockbuster came out with their version of it, it was spectacular. With Blockbuster, you had the same thing. You had your list of movies that you wanted to watch. And so they would send you the DVD, you get it in the mail. Now, instead of sending it back in the mail, you would actually take it to the Blockbuster store. And when you took it to return at the Blockbuster store, you got a free in-store rental. And it was already signed in as soon as you took it back to the store. So instead of having to wait the delay of however long it took in the mail to get back to the Netflix warehouse, you actually got it the new movie sent to you a lot quicker. So as from a customer perspective, it should have been a far superior service, but we'll get into it much later. But when we think about positioning, people didn't think of Blockbuster as a cutting edge, staying up with the times. Blockbuster very quickly became kind of thought of as a slight dinosaur that people, there's no way they could catch up with Netflix, even though they really had tried to. And Netflix was the new cool thing to do. So that was an interesting way to look at new ways to satisfy needs. So tons of different examples, lots of technology examples here in terms of new ways to satisfy needs. Okay, so let's keep moving. So the next piece of our little triangle is opportunity organization matching. So this is really looking at the fit of this opportunity with our company. right? Does it make sense in terms of how we define our business? We're talking in chapter 1 about mission statements, right? Does this fit with our mission of who we are and who we want to be in the marketplace? And what are our strengths? What are our distinctive competencies? And can we utilize those for this new opportunity? So when I was working corporate, the company I worked for, they were originally in the oil business. They're still in the oil business and they currently own 3 refineries. I think at the time they owned 2 when this opportunity came up. And so they had this opportunity where they're, again, they're relatively traditional oil company and had a few other smaller businesses. And then they decided to acquire this company called Invista. And Invista used to be a part of DuPont, and it's a chemical company. And so they use oil-based products primarily to make all kinds of things. But this in particular was fibers. And so they make the fibers for Stainmaster carpet. They don't actually make carpet. They own the name brand Stainmaster, and they make the fibers that go into the carpet. Same thing with Lycra. They don't actually make Lycra fabric like for your leggings, but they make the fibers that would go into Lycra leggings or any other Lycra products. So when they first started looking to acquire this, there was concern about whether this actually fit with the company. Was this an opportunity that fit with the company's distinctive competencies? Was this something that fit with their mission of who they wanted to be? Because they kind of, the thought was, this is an oil company. It's not, they don't make textiles or fibers. That didn't seem to make sense to a lot of people. But what they said was, we're really good at processes. And we're really good just generally at like manufacturing type processes. And so we feel like this is really just a part of our wheelhouse because it's just another kind of manufacturing. And since then, they have acquired a number of other companies that are, again, in different industries, but are related in that they do a lot of different types of manufacturing. And then even within that, I just recently was reading, they have gotten into some like nanotechnology products, some digital products. So they're still expanding, but it's like incrementally as things get added on, they start to develop additional, it works with their distinctive competencies that exist already. And then they continue to sort of add on to those and build those out so that when they go acquire the next thing or when they start another business over here, it really still fits into who they are as a company. This is also where we're going to go back to that SWOT analysis, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, where we're going to be looking at how do we analyze ourselves as a company and what we see as opportunities and threats in the marketplace, and how do those match up to our strengths and weaknesses from our SWOT analysis. Okay, what are the success requirements for that particular opportunity? What are the things that have to be met? What are the requirements for success? And this could be things like legal requirements or environmental requirements that you might have to meet in order to be successful in that industry. The company I used to work for, one of their subsidiaries, one of the companies they own, they have an entire company devoted to monitoring the EPA, what the EPA guidelines are and the new things that come out, and then creating the equipment that different factories need to meet those new EPA regulations. That's the entire focus of the company, is just to monitor whatever the new things the EPA comes out with, and then developing whatever products or new technologies it is that all these different industries would need in order to meet those requirements, right? And so those become really basic success requirements for that industry. And so sometimes when we look at this process and see, does this opportunity fit with us? Does it match with us as a firm, as a company? We have to recognize that sometimes we will have to say no to opportunities that on the face of it seem like they would be very profitable for us. Because sometimes they may not fit with our strengths, with our competencies, and with who we are as a company, with our character. We talked about mission statements. When you think about any company and their list of like guiding values, right? Some companies don't really live those things, but some companies really truly do. And those really do determine whether or not they might pursue certain avenues, certain opportunities. Maybe it is something that is, some people would consider it's legal, it's some people consider ethical, but maybe it doesn't really fit with the type of company that you want to be. Right? There are some companies that would say, we could be really good at building a coal plant, but we don't want to because we think that puts too many carbon emissions in the air, right? Building plants like that are wildly expensive. It's very unlikely that that's a good opportunity for most companies, but that would be a good example of companies that have social missions, social standards that they want to meet within their missions, things like environmental standards beyond those that the government would impose, other kinds of social issues that they want to pursue through their actual, through the business of their company. Those kinds of things might also change what opportunities that companies are willing to pursue because of the different missions that they have for themselves. All right, so let's move on to this really ugly slide. This is the worst slide, but it is a really good way to look at, or a really comprehensive and in one place way to look at evaluating opportunities. So when we think of opportunity evaluation, so this is the third piece, the third corner of our triangle, we oftentimes evaluate things both qualitatively and quantitatively. So we talked about qualitatively matching the opportunity with us as a company. We might also want to look at this in terms of, is there a market for this particular product that we're looking at, producing, these changes that we're looking at making to our company? So we're going to look at what competitors are out there. So kind of looking at this first column here, we're going to look at our competitive activity. And then we have the different types of opportunities on the side here. So we might look at how many and which types of which firms are competing for these users, for these new users. Which firms are satisfying different buyer needs that might be potential competitors for a new product that we think will meet buyer needs that are not satisfied yet. And then what strategies are being employed to satisfy buyer needs. So what technologies are being used? What makes us different? Can we really make a name for ourselves with what we're coming out with? Then we have buyer requirements. So like what kinds of things would affect buyers' willingness to buy our product? Characteristics, perhaps of the buyer. Are there buyer needs that aren't being satisfied? Do we know what those are? Can we identify those? Let's monitor the technology that, where we see technology changing on a lot of different fronts. But even is that accessible for consumers? Maybe there's really cool technology out there to do lots of things like 3D printing in one of the other chapters. And we look at 3D printing and we're like, that's so cool. There's so many things that we could do with that. But when we really take a step back and look at it, what we realize is that that's not accessible for most consumers. So that maybe that's not an opportunity that's really available yet. Then we can look at demand and supply within the market and ask some of these different questions. Like, we see these new buyer needs, but do we think that they're actually long-term? So for example, we've seen a lot of new services and new takes on things come about because of COVID. Some of those things may last long-term, but some of our buyer needs that exist right now or have existed just for the past year may not always exist, right? Or hopefully will not always exist. And so some of these products and services that have come out may remain, but some of them may not because those needs are just no longer there. For example, for a while, we, thought that face masks were just, were kind of over with. We wouldn't need them anymore. We now, of course, we do, but at the time, there was a big push. You could find face masks for like pennies, for nothing, because so many companies had brought in or developed new face masks, all these different designs. We had all these fashionable ones, and a lot of them were super clearanced because those needs were perceived to be nearly over or close to over. And there's just this oversupply in the marketplace. Now, of course, we've seen that sort of reverse itself. But there are companies, there's a company called Norwex. They're a fiber company. They have these really fancy like microfibers, and they use them for cleaning cloths. And then with all this started, they said, what if our cloths, this specific cloth, would make a great face mask? And so they retooled and revamped a bunch of stuff and utilized the technology that they had to develop these face masks that were not as effective as like an N95 mask, but dramatically more effective than like a traditional face mask. But they invested a lot in that. And now I've noticed, I saw something just this week where a lot of those face masks are like 50-75% off because they have this huge oversupply of them. So was it a good opportunity? Maybe, right? Buyer needs not being long-term may not mean that we shouldn't pursue an opportunity. It may just mean that we need to be aware of and really look at the investment required and how long the opportunity might potentially be, or how short it would potentially be, right? We might want to look at environmental forces. How sensitive are the different types of buyers? Are there characteristics of buyers that make them more or less sensitive to different things going on? Brand switching to less expensive brands during a recession or something like that. Price sensitivity, for example. Looking at then we look at organizational opportunity or capabilities, right? So do we have, the marketing pieces in place to access these new groups of buyers? Do we have the capabilities from a creative standpoint, from just a personnel standpoint? Do we have enough people on staff or enough capacity within our marketing agency to utilize some of these? Do we have the supply chain in place to, create this product for this new type of buyer? Can we satisfy these different needs for our consumers, but can we do it in a way that's profitable? So, kind of going back to the face mask example, looking at how the duration of this need can help us understand if we can actually be, profitable within this opportunity. Okay, so lots of different questions, but these are, again, just a really ugly, of course, view of how we could create this sort of matrix and look at these different factors for our evaluating opportunities in the marketplace. We would also be looking at, so these are all qualitative. We would also be looking at some quantitative measures, like looking at our budgets, and what we have available for investing in new opportunities, looking at the potential for the market, how for these new buyer types, what is the size of that market? How many consumers are there? How much do we think they spend every year on these types of products or something similar to what we think we're going to come out with? And how can we potentially forecast sales accurately to see if we can be profitable?